Welcome to Carnegie Mellon University at Davos. We're live at Davos. We're joined live at Davos by two of the 9 faculty members that the university has over at the World Economic Forum, presenting to the forum itself and at a number of private events. It's a great contingent, and we're very excited to have a few moments of time from two of our professors, Chris Harrison, Assistant Professor of Human-Computer Interaction and Director of the Future Interfaces Group, and Anthony Rowe, Associate Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering and a member of Scilab. Chris's research includes work on wearable computing, touch interfaces, and gestural interaction. Anthony's research, he works on networked real-time embedded systems, and more recently on how new systems interact with the environment. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us from snowy Davos. I'm here in snowy Pittsburgh, and we're glad to have a few moments of your time. I wonder if each of you could spend just a couple of moments telling us about what you've been telling the assorted business and government and education leaders gathered there in Davos. Chris, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So actually, Carnegie Mellon just presented its Ideas Lab just yesterday on connected sensors and their implications for the promise and peril of those sensors as they get deployed out into the world. So we know that Internet of Things is this really hot area, industries buying into it, policies forming around it in government, and CMU is really at the technical center of that progress. And so we gave our presentation to business leaders, many CEOs in the room, also people in public policy, to start informing them about those transformative technologies.
That's great. Anthony, what were you talking about?
So I was sort of on the peril side of the discussion. So we broke off into two groups. Half of us talked about the promise of the connected technology. Half of us talked about the perils. So I talked about security of connected sensors. So how do we protect these devices? What are the implications if people are able to compromise devices that are not only now just going to be out in the wild, but things that are actually going to be close to us in our workspace.
Great. Well, those are rich topics and ones I want to delve into in a minute or two. One little bit of housekeeping. For those of us who may be watching the live stream here, you are welcome to ask questions of Chris and Anthony via Twitter. We're going to use the hashtag CMU@WEF. CMU@WEF. That's spelling out at. CMU@WEF. Send your questions. I will read them off and ask the gentleman to address them. Why don't we start? Chris, I'd like to go back to a conversation you and I had briefly before you left for Switzerland, in which you were helping me understand some of your work. And what I took away from that is that those of us lay people tend to think about technological innovation as the gizmo, and we're entirely focused on the new gizmo, where a lot of research is now going on to how human beings interact with their gizmos, and I mean that in the most concrete way. How do we touch our devices? To the broadest way, how do we keep our information secure? That sort of thing. Is that where the research is headed?
I mean, and certainly there is a lot of research going on in that area. There's obviously tremendous advances still to be made in the hardware of computing, but we know increasingly that the interaction is what makes these devices really special. If you look at sort of the success of the iPhone, the hardware was very nifty, but that interaction layer on top of it is really what cemented smartphones as this indispensable device today. So kind of at a very high level, we know that humans are very fast in their own way. Computers are very fast in their own way. But we know that the interactions between the two are kind of slow, and they're slow right now. And so there's an entire department, actually, at Carnegie Mellon University, the Human-Computer Interaction Institute, but it's essentially a department with about 25 faculty that are researching how to make better, more pleasurable, more efficient interfaces.
And what would be an example of that in your work?
So one of the kind of threads of research in my work recently has been this notion of sort of developing new touch technologies beyond multi-touch. So the iPhone, which really brought multi-touch to popularity, was about 8 years ago when that first debuted. The iPhone 1 was about 8 years ago, and multi-touch really hasn't tremendously evolved since then. And so what we've been working on in the lab for about the past 5 years is sort of what does multi-touch 2.0 look like? Are we still going to be using sort of pinching and poking at our phones in 10 or 20 years? or is there new modalities for a touch interaction that we haven't even yet exploited or really understand? And so we've been working on what we call rich touch technologies as opposed to just multi-touch technologies to sort of unlock and explore that future.
Tease us a little bit. What might some of this rich touch look like? What would you do?
So right now, multi-touch, which is why it's called multi-touch, is really all about counting the number of fingers on the screen, hence the multi. And what we want to see is actually sort of the shape of the hand on the screen. What parts of the hand are touching the screen? So, for example, the fingertip or the knuckle or the nail or a stylus. Also the angle that the finger approaches the screen. So not just the 2D touch point, but actually the three-dimensional angle, sort of the vector of the finger on that touch screen. And as you layer like all these different dimensions of touch together, you begin to unlock a touch experience that's much more like the real world. How you might write with a pen on a piece of paper, or paint on a canvas, or even just pick up your cup to drink some coffee. We don't do that by poking our fingers at it. We do that by using our hands in a much more holistic way.
Are these things we're going to see anytime soon in our smartphones?
Yes, in fact, one of the technologies has already been commercialized and spun out of the university as a startup, which is based both in Pittsburgh and in Silicon Valley. So already these technologies are escaping the lab, and hope we have many more of these technologies that are soon going to find their ways onto smartphones. But I can't tell you about all those things. They're in discussion right now.
Looking forward to it. Anthony, you look at how computers and humans interface in a whole different way, and recognizing that it's not always the next cool thing, but that, as you mentioned, there are some dangers and threats that I think we're becoming increasingly aware of. Talk a little bit about where your work is, particularly in that realm.
Sure. So I'm a little bit lower down on the stack than some of the work that Chris does. So we look at sort of the platforms and protocols that allow you to collect rich sensor information. So, for example, if you want to put devices in a room that can tell you something about the occupancy, tell you about the light intensity, if the room is hot or cold, how do we actually make those efficient, deployable? How do we make it so that they can actually live for multiple years on batteries? And then, most importantly, especially here in the context of Davos, how do we make that secure so that we can't break into these devices? So we develop some of the hardware. We develop a little bit of the operating system that runs on those types of devices. We also look at the communication protocols for how they actually exchange information with each other, how they bring it back to gateway systems. And by collecting information from a bunch of different sources, there's a sort of a whole space where we can look at processing data streams to tell you more about a space than what you would get from just one of these individual devices.
So if I understand what you're talking about, you mean that it's not just my computer and my phone and my iPad that are tracking me, but my thermostat and that funny-looking antenna on the light pole and some cameras that I'm not seeing, and that this stuff is all picking up information, presumably at different levels of sophistication, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And feeding it to who knows where.
Yeah, I mean, we're used to seeing our laptops and our phones, which are actually quite capable compute platforms, but we have to charge them every day, right? We know that our phone doesn't have the battery life of something like, a device, a thermostat that you leave on your wall forever. And so there is kind of this discrepancy in how much compute can we push very low, and what does it take to make that practical? But you're seeing computation pushed into many, many, many different diverse aspects of the environment. So it's beyond just hopefully in the next couple of years it'll be beyond just what we see today. You may start to see compute and communication in all of your different connected appliances, other aspects of your life, your car communicating with your home, things like that.
And how do we begin to approach being safe in this welter of stuff that's sending our information around? Are there standards? Are we trying to develop standards, or?
There's been a lot of discussion about standards here. Right now, there really aren't that many that are kind of taking the lead. There are standards and communication protocols that do include some level of security. The approach that we've been taking at CMU over the past couple of years has really been kind of a living laboratory philosophy. We want to push out a bunch of these devices. We want to see what we can do with them, and then we also want to look at the security implications and the privacy implications in sort of realistic settings.
So when you are sitting together on a panel, that must be a fascinating experience. I don't imagine that most of your academic conference work would necessarily have you sitting side by side. What is it like to be sitting in a room full of frankly, power brokers. They're in Davos. What are you learning from each other? What are you hearing from them? I'm just interested in getting a sense of the flavor of the room.
So, I mean, even though me and Anthony are not even in different departments, but actually different schools, nonetheless, we actually do collaborate on projects together. Even though we've both been at CMU, not for the longest time, we're relatively new faculty. But that's really one of the hallmarks of CMU is that interdisciplinary approaches to our work. And so me and Anthony have worked on research together before. With respect to the kind of attendees at Davos, what I think is most intriguing to me, and I don't know about Anthony, is that it brings a very different perspective. These aren't even just necessarily ordinary users, but these are people, like we were just in a session literally half an hour ago with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and hearing his remarks and trying to understand how public policy and also government laws shape the intervention and use of technology is really interesting. That's unless you're dealing with sort of those power brokers, as you say, and hearing their perspectives, not just even sort of the citizens' perspectives, but how the implementation actually gets done is really interesting, and it's giving me certainly new insights.
Yeah, I think there's generally a lot of excitement about kind of industrial 4.0 revolution, sensors, but at the same time, there's a lot of people who really want to understand the risks. A lot of discussion about what are these risks, how can we mitigate them, how can we quantify them, make sure that people kind of know what they're going to expect from years.
And what have you learned from each other? As you're either sitting on a panel or walking down the streets of Davos, anything you heard in the last couple of days that sparked a new interest in your work that you heard from one of your colleagues?
I think you've met some of the most interesting people with Connection.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of my work is focused on doing electrification in rural environments, and that seems to be a pretty popular topic here. There's a lot of discussion about refugee camps and how we can actually make them more livable and improve the quality of life there, as well as just developing nations in general. So there is a fair amount of excitement in looking at how technology can help improve those types of problems. I guess from Chris and I collaborating together, we've definitely seen a lot of overlap in some of the type of vision that Chris wants in human-computer interfaces, and then looking at it from my perspective, I can think about some great technology and hardware that we can actually leverage to make that happen.
That is, you make such an important point. I think it's easy for those of us who are not in your business to sometimes get a little lost in the terminology. It feels abstract, it feels futuristic, it feels unconnected to daily life. But the work you're both doing is deeply connected to the most important challenges that face us, and sometimes in very direct ways, as you're pointing out. That's exciting to me. So I appreciate you mentioning that. We do have a question from Twitter. This is from Gabra Abraham. And now I'm getting that wrong, but it's a long Twitter handle, who is asking, MIT economists predict artificial intelligence will be the first technological advancement that won't create new jobs. Do you agree? And if that's true, what does that mean for the economy? That's not quite fair to ask you as economists, but any reaction when you hear talk like that?
I mean, I think everyone has their own take, because even though AI has been around as a field for a while, it's starting to see really powerful practical uses. A lot of major companies are now putting it to hard work, and we're seeing it be really transformative now that it's sort of migrated from academia into practice. Everyone's gone, every time you do a voice search, AI is powering that voice recognition. So we're seeing it almost on a daily basis now, which wasn't true 10 years ago. But I would say, yes, maybe there is a threat to kind of upending those jobs. But that would be a very short time, a kind of short-term loss. And then every time we've seen a really disruptive technology come, for example, 100 years ago or 200 years ago in the United States, 97% of the population was farming. And you might have said that with mechanization, we lost all those farming jobs. But clearly, with the 3% of people that are involved in agriculture in the U.S. today, is that a bad thing, or should we all go back to farming with, pitchforks and rakes? So clearly that was a benefit, and the same thing happened with the Industrial Revolution and things like textiles and lube. Every single time there's really been an efficiency gain in the workforce and industry, it's freed up jobs, but people have gone on to do better jobs. And I think the key will be that AI is going to replace a lot of those sort of low-level or mid-level jobs and free people to do more creative and intelligent things. And I think in the long run, this will be a great benefit for mankind.
Yeah, and I think that's all summed up in what the World Economic Forum chose as its theme for this year, the fourth industrial revolution. There are no industrial revolutions that have reduced the number of jobs available. And as I look out my window here in Pittsburgh and I watch the immense amount of growth that's going on around the new ideas, artificial intelligence, and other new technologies that are being developed through Carnegie Mellon research and others, seems pretty clear that at least in the short term there are some new jobs being created.
Definitely jobs.
We have we're about 15 minutes in. You have both been very generous with your time, and I appreciate it. I imagine you have more activities to go to before the evening is over, but I just wanted to give you one last chance if there's anything that you saw or heard or reflected that you think those of us back in the States or elsewhere around the world would be interested in hearing. A moment to close it out.
It's extremely high energy here. Glad to be Davos right now.
Yeah, and it's great to see CMU have a presence on the international stage and be able to participate as a thought leader with some of the top universities globally. I think there's only 12 in the United States that are participating, and CMU is one of them, maybe even only 8. There's a handful of universities that are invited to participate here and share their ideas, and it's really exciting for both of us, I think, to participate and have such amazing people participate in the CMU sessions and also be able to meet with them and discuss opportunities in the halls.
That's right, and as you both said, to not only to be interdisciplinary in the sense of crossing academic disciplines, but to engage with government leaders, business leaders, and make sure that that research is really having the social benefit that I know is at the heart of why you do what you do. So with that, I think we're going to thank you gentlemen both. Grateful for your time. Enjoy the rest of your time in Davos, and looking forward to seeing you back in Pittsburgh.
Yes, likewise. Thanks.
Have a good evening.